Hello and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first ever webinar of the Mission Zero Academy. People are still slowly rolling in, so I think we're going to give them a minute or two to get comfortable, get logged in, and make sure that they see us and hear us well. But today we are talking about how a whole nation can transition towards zero waste. And we will be hearing the examples from Wales, which is one of the highest performing countries in the world. We try to keep these webinars casual and conversational. So if you have any questions you would like to ask me or the participant, the speaker, please feel free to use the Q&A function. If you want to say hello or have any other questions, you can also use the chat to introduce yourselves and say hi to the other participants in the webinar. So we are here. Anytime you have a question, feel free to ask in the Q&A function. And my name is Kaisa Karjalainen, and I coordinate the Mission Zero Academy, which is which is here to accelerate the implementation of different zero waste strategies and policies in companies and municipalities. We are the new sister organization of Zero Waste Europe, which is the European-wide network of zero waste organizations. So we all work on the same goal, trying to transform Europe to zero waste, to manage our waste and resources in a responsible way. And our speaker today is Andy Rees from the Government of Wales. He is the head of waste strategy there. Welcome, Andy. We are really happy to have you speak with us and share your expertise and experience with us. Would you like to shortly introduce yourself and what you have been doing and what you are doing currently?
Yes, thank you, Kaisa. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night to everybody. I understand we have quite an international audience listening in, so thank you. I head the team for the Welsh Government that essentially drafts the waste, resource efficiency and circular economy strategies as they've evolved over the years. I've been in the job since 2000, and the Welsh Government itself and Welsh Parliament came into being in 1999. So it's been quite a long and interesting journey. Not only do we draft the strategies for our ministers, but we also then oversee their delivery. We recommend targets, gather the evidence, etc., and then monitor performance. And at various times, I've headed the team that have covered the local authority recycling side of things. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. We're so excited to have you here, and we know that you are a wealth of knowledge and experience that many places can take from. So thank you again for speaking with us today, and hopefully the participants of the webinar really take on board what you are saying. And to start with, would you like to set the scene a little bit? How was Wales like in terms of waste and resource management, say like 10 to 15 years ago? Like, where did you start?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll go back to the beginning. 21 years ago, we were actually at 7% recycling for local authority collected municipal waste then, and 93% landfill. So then 2005, we were around 25% recycling, 2010, 45% recycling, and then 2020, 65% recycling. And we landfill just less than 10% of municipal waste now. So that's been quite a journey over the last 2 decades.
Yes, yeah, great progress right there. And yeah, a starting point wasn't so great, but now you are really far ahead.
Yeah.
So yeah, then what happened? Like, how did it happen that you went from 7% recycling to be the number 3 in the World of Recycling League? Like, what did you do?
Well, we did quite a lot, obviously. Throughout, we've done a lot of co-production with our local authorities, because obviously, you know, they are the delivery body. They're the ones who had to do all the effort really to set the recycling systems in place. But we started off with a an ambitious strategy that tried to look at every intervention that we thought would be necessary to deliver high recycling. So we set ambitious targets. Some thought we were mad to set a 25% target, and then even madder to set a 40% target, and then off the scale when we set a 70% target for 2025. But as you can see, we're not that far away. We did make the target statutory in 2010, and local authorities do face a fine if they fail to meet the targets. So that's the stick. But in terms of the carrot, we've provided over £1 billion in funding. I'm sorry, I was going to convert that to euros, but I haven't. But hopefully that's not too difficult a calculation. So it was £1 billion in funding over that 20-year period to the local authorities to set up a universal collection system for dry recyclables, food waste, etc. Importantly, we've also funded a lot of behaviour change and awareness raising campaigns with the public. And in the mid to late 2000s, we funded a £3 million television and other media advertising campaign called It's Our Future, Don't Throw It Away, using child actors to make the point that it really is their future. We've had technical support from the Waste and Resources Action Programme, helping ourselves and local authorities with best practice. And also importantly, we've learned from others. So I've been on visits to Flanders to look at their fantastic 70% recycling rate that they had quite a long time ago. And for example, also to Milan in the early 2000s to look at the fantastic separate food waste collection system that they had in place. And obviously there's quite a lot of other things we did as well, but those are the key initiatives.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And I think one of the big questions that many municipalities ask us is, where does the money come from to implement all these changes? Because of course it's not free, and like you have been saying, some really big numbers. So what was your go-to source to get the funding that you have been able to channel for to make these changes?
Well, it was the Welsh Government budget. Obviously that comes from general taxation. Local authorities do have their council tax, but we provided the extra funding for the extra effort that local authorities had to carry out. So, for example, I think it was in around 2008, we provided an extra £23 million for our local authorities to set up a universal food waste collection system. And as a result, 99% of our households have separate weekly food waste collection, wherever they're located, even in remote rural areas and in the middle of cities.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then moving on, so what was the inspiration behind this change? Like what caused the Welsh government to decide, okay, we need to do something about our waste?
Yeah, but when the Welsh government was created in 1999, it had a statutory duty to promote sustainable development. So sustainable development has really been the sort of core of everything that's guided us. So our first waste strategy, we look to maximise the benefits for our economy, for social aspects in terms of jobs, and of course the environment. So we looked at carbon right in the very beginning as a means, to work out the best way forward, which is why we tried to put waste prevention and recycling at the foremost in all of this, and get that biodegradable waste out of landfill.
Great. What about the biggest challenges that you have been having on the way?
I guess to be frank, convincing our local authorities and our hard-pressed local authority officers, who have to collect the bins and make sure they're managed properly. So it was a major change for them to not just collect the black bag or the black bin, but to set up a universal collection system, with multiple streams collected and then managing that material. But we worked closely with them and had lots of support from RAP and others. Of course, finding that funding was key. So we used a lot of evidence, to demonstrate why this was a good investment of Welsh Government funding. And I'll be frank, we've had various disagreements over the years about the method of collection. In 2010, we published our collections blueprint, which advocated multi-stream curbside sort, where householders separate out their dry recyclables into different boxes, and then they're hand sorted onto the collection vehicle by the waste operatives, the waste collectors. And if there are any contaminants, those are returned back to the householder with a very polite note, showing them the errors of their ways. And that, obviously results in much lower contamination. But we do have some local authorities that still prefer to use commingling because they believe that's the best system for their householders. So we continue to have lots of discussions around that.
Yeah, we can hear also the same challenge, that it's really difficult to convince some of the decision makers in the local governments to change the ways and find the best ways. Would you have any tips, like how to convince somebody to,
provide the evidence and the reasoning and have lots of discussions. We do not want to force our collections blueprint is voluntary. We do not want to force anyone into the change because we believe that somebody who owns the change and believes in it, will obviously do it in a much better way, because changing your service is a major upheaval, not just for the local authority, but also for the public. And it's really important that it's done well and effectively. There are good examples and perhaps some not so good examples of that happening. But by and large, all our local authorities who have changed have done it very successfully and have had much higher recycling rates.
Yeah, so evidence on the bottom of it, and then engaging and giving still the free will to choose otherwise, but kind of gently guide them to the best solutions. Yeah, sounds great. What about the local authorities? Because you come from the Welsh government, what kind of role the local authorities have been playing in this transition and also in the success?
Well, they are the key to the success, of Wales being third in the world in terms of recycling. They are the frontline deliverers of the service. They have the statutory responsibility to collect household waste. So what they've done has been absolutely superb. We have 22 local authorities that are what we call unitary authorities. So they collect the waste and they also arrange for its management. So we've always worked very closely with them over the years. And I guess we're lucky as a small nation that we only have 22 local authorities to work with. So we know them all pretty well. And we may have our professional disagreements, but I think by and large we get on pretty well together and we understand where each other's coming from. The local authorities have their autonomy and their role to serve their local public, whereas we have a sort of more holistic national role to try and get the best for Wales and all Welsh people. And sometimes, there can be a few tensions between those two roles, but we normally work through them and it kind of works pretty well in the end.
Yeah, great. I think sometimes being small is a benefit for sure.
Indeed, yeah.
And also one big question that we have to deal here at Zero Waste Europe and the Mission Zero Academy is the division of powers, because some powers are with the national government or even higher level. EU is of course giving us some regulations and directives, and then there is the national level, sometimes even regional level, and then the local level. So there's lots of different levels with different powers, responsibilities, and sometimes there might be conflicting interests or lack of action. So can you share a good example of where you have been really successful in this level collaboration?
Yes, I could give two examples, but I'll give one and see if I've got enough time. In terms of, I mentioned that we have 99% of our households with separate food waste collection, but we also wanted that food waste to go to anaerobic digestion to get a better carbon outcome, basically, than in vessel composting. So, of course, you're generating renewable energy as well as a valuable fertilizer in terms of the digestate. So we funded a program that eventually involves 17 of our local authorities out of the 22 who collaborated in 7 hubs, and they then went for joint procurement of a solution. So that resulted in 7 contracts and 5 anaerobic digestion facilities were built around Wales. And because our local authorities are generally on the small scale, collaborating together not only save them the costs in terms of procurement, because that can be quite expensive, but also then in terms of economies of scale for the gate fee and the facilities. And that was a really good example, I think, of Welsh, national government working with local authorities. Also, very quickly, if I may, collaborative change programme we've also funded, which provides support for local authorities wanting to examine their performance in terms of dry recycling and food waste recycling. And that also then helps them if they decide to change and particularly move towards curbside sort and multi-stream collection. And there have been some really good examples of the Waste and Resources Action Programme, who run collaborative change programme, working with local authorities, both planning and then implementing a new service, which, as I said before, it can be quite a big deal, completely, well, it is a big deal, completely changing your collection service.
You can also share the other really good example. We have time and we are all about hearing good examples, and hopefully somebody can take them home. So if you have another example.
I think we've also, through WRAP, been supporting trials on plastic film collection, different ways of doing it. So that's certainly a new waste stream that we need to target. Also working with a number of local authorities on separately collecting absorbent hygiene products, and particularly reusable, particularly disposable nappies, collecting them separately and then trying to find a recycling solution. But that is a bit of a challenge because they're not necessarily designed to be easily recyclable at end of life. But there are some ways it can be done, but not every component of the disposable nappy can be easily recycled. So that's an example of where we're trying to find a joint solution, working with a number of our local authorities.
Great, thank you. And then there's a question from the audience. Have you had some not so successful steps when you have tried to implement something but it didn't go exactly as planned? Can you share some of the not so great examples as well?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the nappies one is faltering a bit. We're still struggling to find a technology provider who can properly recycle the nappies. Thinking about plastic film, the recent trials have gone quite successfully, but there have been previous trials where there's been a lot of contamination of the film, because in an ideal world, you want single polymer film of either polythene or polypropylene, and sometimes PET, but often people put crisp packets in, or biscuit wrappers that are multi-material, sweet wrappers and the like. And in the past, that can cause quite a problem in separating out those different films. But I understand now that the new plastic sorting technologies are a lot better at sorting out those materials. Some of our authorities collect co-collected food waste and garden waste. That can be quite expensive because you're treating all of the garden waste as if it's food waste in anaerobic digestion. So now all of our local authorities collect food waste separately. But by and large, most things have worked pretty well because we've looked at what other people have done and adopted best practice. I'm sure if some of my local authority colleagues are on this call, they'd probably remind me of a few other things. But by and large, by learning what other people are doing and getting lining all your ducks up correctly, as we would say, everything seemed, most things seem to have worked pretty well.
That sounds great, and hopefully the people in this call also will take the good examples from here and then implement them and use them as a good example. So what about the political climate in Wales towards zero waste? How would you describe that?
Obviously, I'm a civil servant, so I've got to be careful talking about politics. But by and large, there has been very strong cross-party support for high recycling and obviously waste prevention as well. There are certain political parties that I think wish we would set our targets higher and quicker. But of course, our targets are always minimum targets, and our deadlines are always something hopefully to achieve before then, ideally. But by and large, we've had very good cross-party support for what is being delivered. And all parties are strong believers in sustainable development, as far as I know, so which is good.
Yeah, have you felt there's a change over the years, because you have been in business for a long time? So have you felt there's a change?
Well, of course, with the climate emergency and nature emergency having such high profiles now, we've recently, well, 2 or 3 years ago, declared a climate emergency. Our Welsh Parliament has done that, and now we've set a new net zero target for 2050 of 100% reduction in emissions. And we're currently putting together our new plans to achieve those targets over the next carbon budget periods. And that is really focusing minds, particularly across the whole of the Welsh Government. We've been working very closely with all the other main departments now, who are responsible for various aspects of consumption through public sector, etc., and through direct emissions. So there is even more of a focus now to get on and do this.
Great. And then there's a question from the audience, like, have you been able to reduce the overall waste production through different kind of initiatives, and what kind of initiative have been the most successful?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very good question. When we first started in this in 2000, our household and municipal waste was rising at about 3% per year, which over 20 years would have meant a doubling. But around 2005, 2006, household waste arising started to stabilise and then started to slowly reduce. I won't claim that every year it has always gone down, but we are on track to try and meet our, I think it's minus 1.4% per year reduction target that we set in 2010. So we have waste prevention targets in our waste strategy and now circular economy strategy for each of the key waste streams. Industrial waste has now decreased, but commercial waste from retailers, offices, public sector is not decreasing quite as much as we might like. So we need to do more work there. Household waste has decreased, possibly because through separate recycling, waste is now far more visible to people. So it's not out of sight, out of mind. And we've certainly got evidence that separate food waste collection has resulted in reduction in the amount of food waste that people are putting out, because the food waste is more visible to them. And of course, they realise how much they're throwing away and how much it's costing them. And we have the Love Food, Hate Waste campaign that RAP are running that has done a lot of work with the public and with communities to raise awareness of the environmental impact of the food that's been wasted, but also the cost to people's pockets.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. There's another question in the chat about if you are landfilling about 10%, what about incineration? Do you have a percentage for that?
Yeah, I should have checked the number. The incineration rate now is around 20-25%, but we're very keen to constrain it. And we set a ceiling of no more than 30% energy from waste, because obviously that's the opposite of 70% recycling. But we want to eventually get to zero waste by 2050, which of course is 100% recycling, which will mean zero energy from waste by 2050. So we hope we might need a tiny bit more energy from waste in one of our regions, just to deal with the waste that can't be recycled and we don't want a landfill. But we really do not need much more energy from waste now, and over time that should reduce it will reduce as the recycling rates go up. And we want a waste prevention and recycling first led strategy to get waste out of landfill.
What about some policies for reuse of materials and products? And do you have some successful examples of those?
Yeah, well, our new circular economy strategy is called Beyond Recycling, deliberately to really push for far more waste prevention, reuse, remanufacture, repair, re-engineering, repurposing, all the re's. We've worked with the community reuse sector over the years. They've had support in the past and some support now. And they're a very vibrant, active sector in providing opportunities for reuse for household goods, and also really importantly, excellent employment often for those who've been disadvantaged in employment, and providing them with training and skills to help them. So they're really great example of sustainable development and our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act that we have now in practice. We grant fund Repair Cafe Wales. We support Fair Share Cymru, which is all about food waste redistribution, and they've been providing millions of meals to those who are in food poverty from surplus food that would have otherwise have been thrown away. But I won't pretend we've done everything. There's more we need to do. Our new government's programme for government has a target of 80 repair and reuse hubs within our town centres and local communities, and that's something new that we'll be working on. We also spent, I think it's like 30 to 40 million pounds last year, providing grants to communities and local authorities, mostly promoting reuse, repair, remanufacturing, remaking, etc.
Right. Sounds. What about what are the plans now for Wales moving towards like consistency in recycling and collection between like different waste sectors?
Okay. With our local authorities, as I said, we have 22, and at the moment 14 of them do curbside sort, multi-stream collection according to the blueprint. Another 2 or 3, as far as I remember, have got fairly firm plans to change to the blueprint. And I think we have, 4 sort of diehard commingling local authorities who at the moment are carrying on with commingling. But we're very happy to support them as much as we can if they wish to change to curbside sort in the future. And then on non-domestic waste from businesses and the public sector, we plan to bring in regulations soon to require the multi-stream separation at source of all of the key dry recyclables and food waste, and for them to be collected separately. And of course, we already have bans for landfill and energy from waste for glass, metal, paper and plastic, but we will extend that to textiles, waste electronics and food. So basically, we want businesses in the public sector to do what most of our householders are doing already and make that fair. The key challenge will be on the go recycling and litter bins, etc. Trying to get them to have separate bins for each material. That's a bit more difficult, but that's where we want to end up eventually, and have a consistent system where everyone sort of is at work, rest and play, that we have exactly the same system to recycle, which we hope will make it easier and a lot better for everyone.
Great. And there's a question regarding, I think recycling success, about multi-materials. What would be your take on that? How to tackle the issue? Like, would you see bans on specific products or packaging which are non-recyclable, and which materials you find the most problematic?
Okay, we are bringing in extended producer responsibility with the other 3 UK nations, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, which will involve a modulated fee being set for each type of packaging. That modulated fee will be based upon the recyclability of the packaging and some other aspects. So anything that can't be easily recycled will be financially penalised, basically. And it'll be up to the producer then to decide whether to change that packaging so it can be easily recycled, or whether they just carry on and take the hit. But also there will be mandatory labelling of whether something is recyclable or isn't recyclable. And I'm pretty sure most of the retailers will want to sell products in packaging that is labelled recyclable. So they will be putting pressure back through the supply chain. So multi-material laminate material is always a challenge, but there are ways to recycle it. It's just to make sure it can be done cost effectively and sensibly, and particularly that the sorting methodology works, because some things are very difficult to sort and then subsequently manage. But if they are collected completely separately, of course they can be managed. But how many different material streams should we collect separately? And that's the practical challenge in all of this. But I'm convinced we will get to a situation where all of our packaging will be recyclable within hopefully a reasonable period of time to help us meet the zero waste target that we've set.
Right, so you need more, like less bans, but more guidance and encouragement, and then making the problematic materials and products.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be done through, a fiscal, financial mechanism really to act as that incentive. I don't know about bans. That would probably be a last resort if the financial sort of penalty mechanism doesn't work. But that will be up to our ministers basically in the future.
Great, sounds good, and thank you for the answer. I think we have kind of cited this already, but what are the biggest challenges? You spoke about the nappies already earlier, but is there some other waste streams that you find are problematic and what you will be working on in the future?
Yeah, well, I've kind of covered this, but we are looking to set new recycling targets after 2025. So on a trajectory from 70% recycling to 100% recycling, we've obviously got to set new higher targets. So we've set up a working group with a representative number of local authorities and with RAP and Natural Resources Wales, who are a regulator, to look at which waste streams need to be targeted next, how they can be separately collected, and what infrastructure we need to put in place. So obviously plastic film is a key one there. That forms quite a large proportion of the residual non-recycled waste. Cartons are another issue. We don't have universal collection of cartons from the curbside. If they're collected with paper and card, they're often a contaminant. So perhaps it would be better to collect them with the metal and plastic stream, and they'd be much easier to separate from them. So that's something we're working on. Nappies I've mentioned, small waste electrical equipment. I think we need to, and the batteries particularly that are contained in them, we need them to be collected separately at the curbside, and then the vehicles need to be adjusted to be able to take them, and textiles as well is something we need to work on. The vehicle, I think you showed at the beginning, currently has 9 compartments in it, the resource recovery vehicle, single pass, collecting all of the materials, dry recyclables and food in one vehicle. But can they be adapted to take other materials separately as well? And I'm told that they can, but we've got to work out practically, how many different compartments or ways of attaching bags or other things to those vehicles are sensible. And that can be worked through by the operatives, obviously, because it does take them time, to load things onto the vehicle. I think they call it slow recycling, don't they? But that means high quality recycling. So that's good.
Great, thank you for that. And I think we need to backtrack a little bit to your recyclable label, because it has spurred quite a few questions in the Q&A. Okay. So will this recyclable label be your own, like the Welsh government's own, or the UK wide, or is there some other? Because there's labels for the whole world. So have you chosen one that's already existing, or is it your own?
I mean, we currently have the voluntary OPRL on-pack recycling label scheme that quite a large number of our major brands, who make products and sell them in the UK, and our major retailers also subscribe to. Although I do note in some of the things that I've bought in a local shop that all of them carry that label on them, even though the brand says that they do. But this will be a mandatory scheme for labelling that will operate across the UK. So yeah, I mean, it will be a different system to other parts of the world, probably, but it'll be up to the scheme administrator to work with the brands and the retailers to agree on the label. So that's how that will be developed. But I'm fairly sure we were going to mandate that. So then it's absolutely clear to people what can and can't be recycled. The key thing, of course, is to deem what threshold there is for what might be recyclable or not recyclable. And I've heard people say that you need a system in place to ensure that at least 60% of a particular type of packaging or other product is actually recycled through the infrastructure before it can deem to be recyclable. Now that's just one suggestion. I'm not saying that's necessarily that will kind of the one that will come in place. But if you only have a 2 or 3% recycling rate for whatever you're putting onto the market, I don't think that would reach the threshold of being deemed to be recyclable.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of leads us to the another good question from the Q&A, which is about greenwashing, because of course it's very easy to create any kind of labels which don't mean anything and greenwash. So have you come across any local operators in your area trying to put some greenwashing labels on their products?
I'd have to be diplomatic, of course. There is a constant debate around that. I mean, as I said, things that I buy often have a label of recyclable or a particular symbol that makes you think it's recyclable. And I know, very well that it won't be collected for recycling, isn't collected for recycling in Wales or in the rest of the UK. One of the issues that is very challenging is when somebody puts a compostable label on, because a lot of people get confused by that. Yeah, but maybe that's the subject of a whole separate seminar, I would suggest. Yeah, but that is very misleading in some respects, because you really don't want to put it in your home composting bin, particularly if it's made out of PLA, because it will take a long time to compost. So where do you put it? So if I buy something in a compostable plastic, I put it in my black residual bin, because that's the only place that it can go.
Great. What about other collaboration between you and the, for example, supermarkets who bring lots of packaging into the market? Have you any collaboration, for example, to reuse or reduce packaging with them on top of the recyclable label that you are implementing?
Yes, I mean, reuse and refillables particularly is obviously a really important area. Didn't help with the pandemic and people's, perhaps concern about hygiene. But I was lucky that a plastic-free refill shop opened in my village a few months before lockdown, and that's the only place I've been shopping. Basically, we haven't used a major supermarket in 18 months. So the amount of plastic waste that I produce has gone right down, and even the amount of residual waste that I produce has gone right down. And touch wood, I haven't caught COVID. I am now vaccinated. But that concern, I think, can be allayed quite well. But you can understand people's concern there. So I think that somewhat stalls for a little while. Sort of wholesale move towards reuse and refillables. But a number of local authorities, a number of retailers have been trialing, plastic-free aisles with refill and reuse initiatives. The UK Plastics Pact is working with the major retailers, trying to reduce single-use plastic and make things more recyclable. But you're right, or whoever asked the question, reuse and refill, we need to have a lot more of it. Maybe that's more of a role for some of our smaller shops, and that's something that we'd really wish to encourage, and more sourcing of locally grown food. The new Welsh government is very keen to promote that as well, and perhaps that will help with less plastic packaging in the future as well.
Great, thank you. And then while we are in the COVID theme already, is there any other ways that COVID has affected your zero waste plans, apart from these like hold-ups for having packaging-free items and stuff like that?
Well, obviously, during the lockdowns, when more people have been working from home and not going out to restaurants or pubs, the composition of household waste has changed. There's more food waste being produced, a lot more packaging, cardboard packaging, particularly because people have been buying things online. And also more glass and metal, as people have been drinking at home rather than in pubs. But generally, our system of multi-stream collection and high quality recyclate being produced has been pretty resilient. Good markets have been found. A lot of our manufacturers who've been sourcing raw materials abroad are now looking to source secondary recycling materials from within Wales and the UK. To actually make it a lot more easier for them to support, to source those raw materials. So that is actually a real positive. At the moment, there's obviously issues with drivers and staff, those who may be off with COVID or having to isolate, and local authorities are having to manage their workforce quite carefully there. But moving into the future, COVID has highlighted the challenge to supply chains, and I think it all really helps our move towards more self-sufficiency, circular economy, resource efficiency. It justifies even more why we need to do this. And of course, the climate emergency and nature emergencies are not going away. So our plans our future plans haven't been materially disrupted. Finances, budgets, etc., are obviously a challenge here, and that's something we're currently discussing as we move forward.
Great. What about the reaction from the citizens? Because of course, the Welsh citizens have faced big changes in these last couple of decades, or even 10 or 15 years. How have they reacted to your zero waste plans?
Well, they've been absolutely fantastic. All of this has been done on a voluntary basis. We don't have direct and variable charging in Wales or in the UK. So they've all done it out of the goodness of their hearts, or most people have. And we've been lucky in Wales. Most surveys that I've seen of public awareness and sort of behavioural insights or attitudes show that in general, the Welsh public are more green and are more interested in doing the right thing. We have perhaps a very good sense of community in Wales, and a lot of our landscape is protected environmental landscape. So I think that overall sort of green ethos has really helped us, and the public have been absolutely amazing. We couldn't have got here without them.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you did the big communication and education campaign. Have you done something else to educate and train the public? Yeah.
So our campaign in the mid to late 2000s was all about sort of the environmental damage caused by landfilling and how it'd be a good thing not to do that. But now our more recent campaign called Be Mighty is all about celebrating success and trying to encourage those who are perhaps less keen to recycle to realise that it's a real good feel-good thing to do, and to we have ambitions to be first in the world for recycling. So Wales as a nation is already pretty proud, but we want to try and get to the top. So we've been building on that through the Be Mighty campaign, using behavioural insight analysis to do that. So RAP have done a lot of analysis over the years of people's awareness and attitudes to what they call the 3 R's tracker on reduction, reuse and recycling. And that has really helped inform the messaging. So we've been, so the campaigns have been trying to use media to message those who are perhaps a bit more reluctant to recycle. So segmentation of the audiences and the population has been carried out to try and make sure that we cost effectively target our communications in the right way. And that programme has worked very closely with all the local authorities, of course. They have local messages as well as national messages. And that's really important. Something we learned from Flanders is the real importance of communication to the public.
Yeah, so what you take from your experience is that the Welsh system is based on lots of volunteer, there's no big hard bans and stuff like that, and it's doing the right thing is the kind of carrying force there. And also that goes with the local government, so they have been able to choose how they want to do the collection on the local level. So then there's a question in the chat, in some places there's an example from the Netherlands that some municipalities are abandoning a separate collection of some waste streams and opting for the post-collection sorting. And the reasoning for that is that there's so much contamination when people sort at homes. What's your take on that? What's your view on post-collection sorting?
Okay. Well, our collections blueprint system involves people separating out the recyclables into boxes, into separate boxes. Those boxes are then hand sorted onto the vehicle by the waste collection staff. If there's a non-target item in there, it is returned back to the householder, often with a little polite note informing them of the errors of their ways. So that usually results in less than 1% contamination, providing the staff are able to do their job properly. So there is that instant communication. So curbside sort delivers very, very high quality recycling. So it isn't a problem. Obviously, plastics can be a challenge. The different types of plastic and the different ways, different sort of shapes of plastic packaging can be a challenge. And what can and can't be accepted, like plant pots, for example, the black ones are hard to recycle, but normally those would be rejected if the local authority can't get those managed through the system that they use. I think with bring banks, where people take their recyclables to a bank on the street, obviously you can't control contamination that way. So I think the UK and Wales is unusual in having that curbside sort approach. I may be wrong, but certainly I haven't seen many examples elsewhere of that sort of approach being used.
Yeah, well, we're talking about the curbside sort. There is a question also, what about like injuries or any hazards for the people who do the curbside sorts, like back injuries, shoulder injuries, stuff like that?
That's all been analysed very carefully over the years, and the health and safety executive are happy. Obviously, there has to be manual handling training. One issue has been noise from glass when the glass bottles are put into the container, but that also, that's trying to be addressed and minimised. So there are ways to do that. The RAT Run Collaborative Change Programme has all of the evidence and data associated with occupational health risks and how those can be managed. So yes, that was one of the arguments and debates that we had right at the beginning, but that was probably in the mid to late 2000s. But as far as I'm aware, all of those issues have now been addressed, and more of our authorities are switching to curbside sort.
Yeah, that's great, because for the regular person, that sounds like a hazardous job and might be difficult to get people to do it. But if there's good examples, I'm sure some other municipalities and local authorities will take the same approach. What about the climate connection? You kind of cited that a little bit with the incineration question. How do you see zero waste is a step for Wales's climate journey? Because I believe you have also pretty high climate targets.
Yes, indeed. As I said, we've set the net zero target for 2050, so that's reducing our emissions by 100%. In terms of waste and resources, there are basically the direct emissions from landfills and from incinerators. So for landfills, we aim to basically landfill zero biodegradable waste before too long. With incinerators, we intend to reduce the amount of plastic waste in the residual stream going to the incinerators, and hopefully they may be able to do carbon capture and storage in the future if that's affordable. But then, of course, we have the consumption-related emissions. So that's all of the embedded carbon in the products that we import from abroad, and also in the products that are manufactured in the UK and in Wales. Reducing waste, reducing our materials use, and recycling a lot more, substituting secondary raw materials for primary raw materials will help reduce those overall consumption emissions. So we're working with our economy colleagues to try and decarbonise major industries in Wales, such as the steel industry, the paper industry, glass insulation industry. So substituting secondary raw materials requires then less energy to melt or burn or reprocess the raw materials. And so that's fewer carbon emissions. So various figures I've seen, but something between 45 to 80% of overall global carbon emissions come from the products that we manufacture and consume. So it's not just emissions from vehicles and from energy. So resource efficiency, circular economy will play a key part of helping combat carbon emissions and addressing climate change.
Yeah, and I think this conversation will get into a bigger gear in the next few weeks and months with COP26 approaching.
Indeed.
At least we at Zero Waste Europe and Mission Zero Academy hope to participate in that conversation to try and make the case that zero waste is also a climate action. And we actually are having a calculator which is able to assess those impacts of different waste policies. So we are really looking forward to seeing some results of those, because it gives you concrete numbers of your policies. Do you have any recommendations, or what's something that you think that went really well and you would like to share with the audience?
I suppose generally, have the courage of your convictions, but the important thing is make sure those convictions are evidenced. Everything that we've done has been very robustly evidence-based, and that helps try and persuade people and perhaps answer the arguments that come back, like that one on occupational health, for example. So there have been studies looking at that. So every time there's a perceived barrier, it's really important to investigate it and to determine the best way forward using the evidence. And I think it's that strong evidence base that has really helped us move forward and move forward in a common direction in the end, with one or two exceptions.
Great. So we got to the end of the questions that we thought that we should be asking you, and we know that you're an expert on. So now if anybody from the audience still has more questions for Andy, please shoot them in the Q&A function. We have a good 7 minutes of time to answer them. So now it's time to dig into his wisdom. And while we're waiting for new questions to arrive, there's one more in the Q&A already waiting. What role do you see for municipalities to play in tackling the single-use packaging and transforming the system to reusables? For example, takeaway food and packaging. Like what could municipalities do to accelerate it, and also what kind of support they would need to do their work?
Yeah, this is an area we need to do a lot more on. I mentioned our Circular Economy Fund from the last financial year, and that, for example, supported, I can't remember the name of it, but a refill initiative. I'm trying to remember which town it was, apologies, up in Northeast Wales. I think it was Mould, I think it was, basically involving quite a few of the takeaways, supplying their takeaway food in refillable packaging. I think they were using the steel or metal tiffin boxes, which have been used elsewhere. And that was a great example of a community-led initiative, but I think it was involving the community council or the local council as well. And we'd certainly wish to encourage a lot more of that with either the community council or the local authority, county council, working with its businesses, not just takeaways, but also small shops, and then promoting those to residents. We have a network of zero waste shops now, but I'm not sure how many people are aware of them, and they need promoting a lot more. So I think we all need to do our bit on that one. We want to set up reuse hubs within towns, maybe village centres, and whether they can promote refill within those hubs, who knows, but certainly repair, we're keen to see them work on as well for normal household items, and things like Library of Things, we're also keen to support. So we have an initiative called Benfig Library of Things. Also, we have Refill Cymru to make Wales a refill nation, and I think there's over 1,000 drinking water refill stations now across Wales, which is reducing the number of single-use plastic water bottles used. So there's common branding of that, and certainly a number of community councils have worked on that. And I know a number of community councils have set up plastic-free initiatives, working with their local businesses. Things like cafes, encouraging reusable or refillable cups instead of single-use cups. So it's an exciting time. There's a lot that can be done, and there is a lot of support for it, which is great.
Yeah, what would be the biggest obstacle for a municipality to accelerate that kind of transition even further? Like, what kind of support would you need in the local government or the national government to do even better, since you said that it needs more work done?
Well, we've been having ongoing discussions with our local authorities. So, they've quite rightly highlighted a number of challenges. One is making sure that everything is easily recyclable, which it certainly isn't at the moment. But I said extended producer responsibility, certainly for packaging, will help that. But of course, we need to look at non-packaging, which also makes up, a significant part of the waste stream. In the UK Environment Bill that's currently going through Parliament, there are provisions for all four governments to work together, if they like, to set up mandatory labelling and mandatory standards for products. So that could, give us powers to, mandate recycling in the future, mandate a embedded carbon level, maybe. It could set a standard for the material composition, perhaps. But they're quite ranging powers, but there's a lot more we need to do, and go through each of the waste material streams one by one in terms of their carbon impact, and then see how they can be addressed. But it will take a while, which is why we have set our zero waste target for 2050. Hopefully we'll get there earlier, but Wales, of course, can't do it on its own. Maybe we need action at a UN or OECD level, as well as a European and UK level, to achieve all of this, because of the supply chains that we're all involved in. We have to do this collaboratively together.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, think about your 2050 zero waste target and the current challenges with the recycling. Do you see it's possible to get to 100% recycling? Because there is currently there is rejects in the process, in the recycling process, so, causing residual waste. So can you see it's actually possible to get to 100%?
There's probably a Newton's law of physics or some law of physics that says that 100%, like 0%, is technically impossible. But if we get as close as possible to it, then we will. You can't help. I mean, if somebody inadvertently fuses two things together that are then impossible to recycle, that may be a challenge. Yeah. So 100% of anything, I would suggest, is virtually impossible. But if we get to 99 or 99.1 or 99%, then I'll be happy. But I think we can, improve hugely on where we are now, and I'm convinced we will get a lot better.
Yeah. What about schools? How you are educating future generations?
Yeah, that's a very good point. For years, we've had the Eco Schools programme in Wales. I can't remember, it's something like 90% of our schools are eco schools. And we've had a specific waste sort of recycling programme with them over the years. But of course, the children are the key to our future. We have tried to involve them as much as possible in shaping our new strategy beyond recycling. We have a youth parliament who were involved. And yes, we need to do even more with our children at all levels, because they are the consumers of the future and also the waste producers of the future, and it's their future we're trying to help here. So yeah, they are really important in all of this. There's also tester power with their parents, and I've heard many examples of that, where the school children have come back and said, mummy, daddy, or whatever, why aren't you recycling? So that is good.
That's great. And then the final question for this afternoon is that when you started your ambitious strategy, lots of people said you are crazy. So what were the best arguments that you used to get others on board, or what kind of evidence was the most successful? So if you could give the audience 2 or 3 tips, what you did.
Well, it was showing people where it's been done already. So I gave the example of Flanders for dry recycling and Milan for food waste. Importantly, trialling. One of our most sceptical local authorities set up a pilot food waste collection system to prove us wrong. And the manager said he did it deliberately, but he thought, I better do it well or I'll be criticised if I don't do it well. So he did it well and it worked amazingly. And he was quite happy to give a presentation with me and actually say that he admitted, that we were right, basically. And that was very gratifying. So showing people how it could be done, giving them some funding to trial it out, and then owning it themselves, I think is probably the most important thing in all of this. So we've come a long way, but we still want to go further. And there are examples of where people have gone further, and that's what we're currently looking at.
Right. It's 3 o'clock here in Brussels. So it's a time to thank you, Andy, for talking to us today and sharing all your good examples and your inspiration for all of us. And also thank you for all the participants for joining us today. We will be following up with you, sending you the recording when it comes available. And also we will be sharing some other resources that Zero Waste Europe has generated before, and some solutions how to hopefully help you and your local authorities to get the similar results that Wales has been doing. But that's all for today. Thank you, Andy, again. Thank you all the participants, and we'll hope to see you soon in our next webinar next month.
Well, thank you and good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.